I'll have you introduce yourself, but you are a food and cooking editor at the New York Times. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct. Nikita Richardson. I joined the Times at the end of 2020 and working on basically mostly editing stories, sometimes bringing in like working with recipes, but mostly editing stories. And previously, I'd been at Grub Street at New York Magazine as a staff writer, and I was an editor at Bon Appetit like 5 years ago. And yeah, I've just been in journalism for a while though, since about 2014 or so. But I always kind of kept on coming into food like all the time
Yeah.
because I like to eat too much. Like I love eating. So I was like, so wherever I was like, what if there's a food angle here, right? And there's always a food angle.
Now, so you were at Bon Appetit 5 years ago. I don't know if she was still there. Do you know someone by the name of Rochelle Bilo? Okay.
No.
Rochelle used to write there, and I forget where she's writing now. But anyways, we went to high school together, and she was at Bon Appetit for a little bit. So yeah.
Oh, cool.
So how did you first get into food? Like, what led you to want to start writing about the food scene and restaurants and cooking?
I think I would have to trace it back kind of to when I moved up here for grad school from Georgia. I'm originally from the Atlanta area, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be a psychologist, which was my major in undergrad. So I was like, I like writing. Let me go to journalism school. And so I got into NYU, and my second semester, I had like a very rough start, but then my second semester, I kind of really found my footing. And I was in a class called Eating New York. And it was all about like our teacher, my professor, Meryl Gordon. She would take us to dim sum, and we went to Le Bernardin and like took us around to kind of experience eating in New York City. And then we also had to write a profile or like a long story. And I ended up cold emailing Carlo Miraci, who's the chef at Roberta's. And I was like, hi, can I profile you for my graduate class? And he said yes, because he had also gone to NYU. And I ended up spending three nights there. And he had just opened Blanca. And so I was like shadowing him, and I got like to talk to his dad. I'm still friends with his dad on Facebook, and like just all these different things. And I kind of was like, hey, this is like really fun. And I found, chefs and people in food are just a little more easygoing, because after I left, after grad school, and my first real job was at Fast Company magazine, where I'm like talking to CEOs and other like business people, and the responses are always very canned and very, like they have to toe the company line, of course. And I found chefs and people in food to just be so much more candid and upfront, and that has kind of proven out even years later. There's, of course, you have different levels of openness, where you're like when you're doing like a massive restaurant group versus a chef with like a hole in the wall place. But all in all, it's definitely a more approachable crowd, I'd say. And then also like people just love it. Like food is anywhere I've ever worked. Everyone, I worked at places where people cover everything, but people always like want to be around the food people, because the food people always have free food near them, or they know where to go eat, or that, what I mean? It's just like the people, like everyone loves food. So it's the most fun group to always be about, like to be around those people.
Yeah. It's I find it, I don't know how you feel about it today. I've always found stories about food to be more fascinating when I am talking about the people that are behind a concept, behind a restaurant, or the staff, the chef, the owner, whoever it is. And sometimes I can find myself not talking so much about the food, but talking about the person, instead, and kind of their experiences. What was it like going from Fast Company to, well, you did the profile in school, but what was it like going from, Fast Company to then was your next jump right into food from there?
Yeah, so right after that, I had an editor who had been at Fast Company who told me Bon Appetit's looking for an assistant editor. And I still didn't know a ton about food. These were very much the lean years. So it wasn't like I was going out to nice restaurants or anything like that. I was just kind of cooking for myself a lot. But I ended up getting the assistant editor job at Bon Appetit, and that was a whirlwind of a year. I was only there for 1 year because then they had layoffs at Condé, and I ended up losing my job. But it was definitely like really interesting, though, to see how food works when you're not only writing about restaurants, but you're also writing about how recipes are made. And so I got to see all those different parts of it and put it together for a magazine every month. And I've always really loved working in magazines, and it's a very visual medium. And I worked with like some good folks who really, cared about good packaging on things. I thought that was a really valuable part of the experience. And then after I got laid off from there, I wasn't sure if I was going to go back into food again. Food jobs aren't plentiful. Anyone can tell you that. It's not like pop culture where there's 60 different, jobs at any one moment. This is something like, maybe a few good jobs open up at any one time at any of like the major publications. But then I don't know, the timing just really worked out at Grub Street, and they had just lost a longtime editor there, and so they were hiring a new staff writer, and I put my name in, and it was like extremely quick. Got the email like the same day being like, interview, and I was like, okay. I had been an intern at New York Mag when I was in graduate school, actually, for one summer and fall, so it was kind of cool because I got to come back exactly 5 years later and be part of the team and start, covering. And I think it was easier for me too, because Bon Appetit was a national magazine. So you have to know all these restaurants across the entire United States. And you had to like memorize all this stuff. But like New York, it's like the backyard shrank significantly. Even though New York has so much going on, it's still like, okay, cool. I don't have to go too far out of my way. Like it's all here. I don't have, you know what I mean? And so getting to shrink the kind of landscape that I was studying made my life so much easier. And then it was kind of much easier to pick up from there. And around the time I got there too, they did a massive update to their restaurants, like their restaurant search engine thing at New York Mag. And so that was kind of a chance for me to see places that maybe opened 6-7 years ago that we're not really talking about anymore, but they've kept on going around. They have they're still popular in those places that I necessarily wouldn't have known about because when they were first opening, again, the lean years. So I kind of, I feel like that was a really good, and I was there for 2 years just covering. And of course I was there literally right when the pandemic hit. I was, in the office one day and they said somebody tested positive for COVID in our building, not on our staff, but in our building. And we're going to send you guys home. And we think you'll be back by the end of the week. And obviously we were not back by the end of the week. And then it was just like, I was at Grub Street for 2 more months after that. I ended up taking another job on another team, just for reasons of like, it was going to be like a lot easier for me in my career at that time. And so I was there in that really tense period when restaurants, that weekend where restaurants didn't know what was happening. They're like, are we shutting down? And people were going out. I had like my last supper kind of at, Hearts. I went to brunch with my friend, and then I think it's Monday the 15th of March or something like that. Then that's when the edict kind of comes down. We're done. No more indoor dining. And of course, outdoor dining wasn't a thing yet. Yeah. And then came all the GoFundMes, and I turned around a story in under 24 hours of just calling around to restaurateurs saying like, what's happening? Like, you have a GoFundMe, and it was people just being like, I just laid off my entire staff this morning, and it was devastating. And I ended up like compiling a list of, every single GoFundMe I could find, and having people message me like, "Can you please put this on the list?" And, I think it was hard because, like, no one, like, the amount of money that they needed to keep afloat was a really hard number to come up with at that time. Like, you're saying we need 80K, and it's like, okay, but most restaurants don't have the kind of, like, customer base, even if they have regulars who can just raise 80K in a night.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And add to that, when every restaurant needs 80K in one night, it's a really hard task. So, and then, through the summer, I kind of watched the, pivoting, hate that word, but, the pivoting, the outdoor dining, the markets, the everything, the like the, slapdash cookbooks for fundraising, the, every little part of it, and just going out to pop-ups when people were like, we need people to come out and do these, and just kind of trying to, like, be part of it and do what I could, and trying to, like, kind of focus on what restaurants I was like, who do I really need to still be there after this is over? You know what I mean? And where am I most loyal as a customer, and kind of going to those places a lot. And then also, one of the first things I did when I came to the Times was pitched a whole story about how, there was this understanding that, like, oh, this was devastating to restaurants, and it was, but it also, I think, gave people a much, much better understanding of what was in the neighborhoods where they lived. Because, if you have any concept of what it's like to live in New York before, it's like you spend all your time in the city at work, because most people's jobs are in the city, and then you come home and or maybe you go to a restaurant in the city or whatever, but you don't really know what's in your own backyard because you end up going home just to sleep a lot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I feel like, and Julia Moskin ended up writing out the story about this one block in Ditmas Park, and all these businesses were like, it's like we met the people who lived here for the first time, because suddenly no one's going to go much further than their neighborhoods during the height of the pandemic. I was just sticking around in Bed-Stuy, going around to places that were in, like, a 30-minute walk from me, you know what I mean? And so kind of finally exploring my own backyard for the first time, even though I've lived in the same apartment for, I can't even, like, almost half a decade. And I think a lot of people have the exact same experience, if they've found themselves not really being as much of an explorer before.
Yeah. It was the early days of the pandemic were interesting. We're here in Syracuse, which is the greater Syracuse area has about 400,000 people. So pretty small. But I recorded a podcast with a local chocolatier on what was supposed to be the St. Patty's Day parade here in Syracuse. And it was the first day of 50% indoor dining. And so he and I on the podcast are talking about, yeah, this sucks, but it's only 2 weeks and everything will be back to normal. And I wound up editing that interview about a month later and just thinking about how stupid I was saying,
Exactly.
And
I think everyone thinks they were, like, so stupid at that point.
Yeah, it was,
Sorry
yeah. So there was, I wasn't sure in the early days if we were going to go, for a little bit there, it felt like we were going to go back to Mayberry a little bit. I mean, there's a really nice restaurant here in Syracuse called Eden, and it is a completely wood-fired restaurant. And most of what they source is from local farms here in upstate New York and the Finger Lakes. And so they started what they called the Eden Fresh Network, and they were just buying produce and meat and dairy from these local farms, and then selling it on their website and delivering it, right to their door once a week, twice a week. And for a moment there, I thought we were going to kind of go backwards in time. I thought we were going to get hyper localized, and people were going to come out of the pandemic and be more focused on that. I mean, I made more sourdough bread and pizza during the pandemic than I ever have in my life. and we got chickens for our backyard and started raising, chickens, and we live in, just outside of the city of Syracuse. So we had 7 chickens running around, and I was like, this is what the world is going to be like now. And now here we are 2 years later, and that's not the case.
Yeah. I think people always will, like, there's, like, even as much as the pandemic turned a lot of us into homebodies, I think at the end of the day, we're still people who seek connections outside our houses, and you can only do the homesteading thing for so long before you're like, you know what? I don't want to cook dinner tonight.
Yeah, that's true. So that did not last too long as things started to open back up for us. But how did your writing change from just before the pandemic to even today?
I think that honestly, the pandemic turned me into a much more thoughtful and just kind of like, I think thoughtful in the sense of understanding how many things are at work. Like you were just saying about how when a restaurant shuts down, it doesn't just affect the restaurant. It affects produce. It affects the people who come and pick up that restaurant's, laundry. It affects, it affects so many different people that go, and then you have to think the employees. A lot of employees are not the people who are interviewing, right? It's people who are living, maybe an hour out from the restaurant and coming in every day to do, prep work and all these different things. And it's literally, a restaurant is a living, breathing thing with many, many component parts to it and people. And so, I think understanding restaurants on a more, I don't know, I guess macro level has been really, really interesting to me, and has, and also understanding that the industry itself was very, very broken. And, I think that there's a lot of discomfort with people about even like what we're still not fully out of the woods. And I think that like and I feel like there's still a kind of tension about, well, are we going to return to the low wages? Are we going to return to the back-breaking work with very few breaks and, all those, problems? Because right now, restaurant industry is still facing a labor shortage. And there's always been labor issues in restaurants because, my internet connection is unstable. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Don't worry about it.
Sorry. Is it better now? Okay.
Yeah.
But we've there's always been this kind of a labor issue with, staffing turnovers. That's a constant in restaurants. But now they're experiencing struggles even getting people to take a job, because I think many people who were doing it before the pandemic have really sat down and asked themselves, why would I go back to that? And, I see, and this is even at restaurants that you would say, they're so popular, they must have no problem attracting talent. It's across the board, top to bottom, big restaurant groups to small places. It doesn't matter. Everyone's having a hard time getting talent because there need to be these fundamental changes, and it's hard to make those fundamental changes when you're coming out of a period of profound distress and, financial instability.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think it really caught restaurants unaware. The margins are already razor thin, and how do you, without that cushion, the bottom really fell out. And I don't think anyone ever wants that to happen again, regardless of, whether you're a owner or a diner or an employee or, any of these things. It was really, I think, devastating. And I want to see, for me as a reporter and, and as an editor, I just want to kind of think of it as where do we move on? How do we create a better restaurant industry? And then also I think that what really struck me is, last year 2 years ago almost, wow, during the George Floyd protests and Black Lives Matter, it also inspired a lot of employees to call out really bad actors in the industry. And, that's always happened at kind of a slowish pace, but I feel like it really kicked it up a notch during that, and people feeling more empowered to speak up against bad, chefs and managers and all that. And, I think I just feel like it's made me really just want to not take anyone at their word anymore. Just as like, oh, I'm a good guy or I'm a good woman and I support my employees because if you went but you can't, it's hard to access those employees. Many are afraid to speak because they don't want to lose their jobs. It can be an insular industry. And so, that we've seen so many places that were getting, massive praise turn out to have not great people. And I think just like being more conscientious about how we paint figures in food has never been more important.
Yeah. I don't know if you're like me in this regard, but I found, doing this now for 6 years, that there's sometimes the chefs or the restaurant owners, if I fall in love with a restaurant, I'm there all the time. And so, and then I get to know them more. And I like to keep my chefs and restaurant owners up on the pedestal. and so as I get to know them more, and maybe I'll hang out with them one night after service, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, but I don't like what I just saw. I don't, maybe not necessarily in who the person is, but even just like, oh, that's how it works back in the operations behind the curtain. And that bums me out. So I try to keep now, if I really like a restaurant for the first couple visits, I try to keep a distance. Is that challenging for you, to be able to separate, okay, this is the place I know, the chef that I know he's been at these few restaurants, she's been at these few restaurants. Is it hard for you to kind of separate that from what you're writing about and what you're covering?
I would say that one, at the Times, the level of ethics is so high that technically I should have no friends who are chefs or anything like that. But, I've been doing this for a very long time. Of course, you're going to have one or two or three. Everyone has a few people that they're friends with who are chefs or in the industry. And, but I think it's just that distance just always has to exist. And especially in, if you're covering the industry, if you're not, go off, have fun. But, I think it's just one of those things as well where just because you're friendly with somebody or what have you, it's the same way. It's the same thing that happened with me too. It's like, believe women. Well, if someone tells you that this person is not great, believe them. They have a reason for it. You know what I mean? And then, and I think that's how everything is with being within the Times as well, is knowing that, well, anyone could always become a subject of coverage at any time. Anytime. You don't know when it's going to happen. You don't know. Things come out of left field all the time. And so, keeping that in the back of my mind is very, very important, that anyone could become a subject at any time. And and then at that point you need to, and make it extremely clear, I'm a journalist. First and foremost, that's my job. I'm a journalist. I cover things that are newsworthy. And so take that as you will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are some of those things that what are the industry changes that you've seen from the early days of COVID to today in New York?
I mean, well, obviously outdoor dining has been we have a lot of not in my backyard folks in New York City. So, there are people who are outdoor dining is the absolute worst thing that's ever happened. And it definitely has its drawbacks, like it's not perfect. Not every outdoor seating arrangement is going to be aesthetically pleasing, but I feel like it has been one of the most exciting things that's ever happened ever. Like, it turned New York into Europe overnight. Literally overnight. Like, and I think the best thing is that the outdoor dining is in every neighborhood. It's every neighborhood. Like, it's not just in the nice parts of Manhattan. It is on my block, and we've lost parking spots, but I have a car, and I'm still like, I don't care. It's worth it because it's allowing restaurants to add on tables, and if they have the bandwidth for it, that's an amazing boon to them, because that can be doubling your seating like overnight. And then and we do have this summer weather. Like, I'm from Georgia. Summer in New York is not even that different from summer in Georgia. The only difference is Georgia has more 90-degree days, but New York is just as hot. So it's amazing to have that. Like, I've loved the advent of outdoor dining. Honestly, I think it's made the city, just the landscape of the city, so much richer, and you have this it makes the people watching even better in a city that already has primo people watching. Also, we just lost a lot of really good places. A lot of chefs left. There's been a kind of goodish side to that too, in that chefs are leaving to go back home or to some other smaller city, and they're opening amazing restaurants in smaller cities. Yeah. So, New York will always be inundated with great restaurants. Right. I want great restaurants everywhere. So I think that is, there's two sides to that coin, in my opinion. But it has been, losing Uncle Boone's. I think people will never get over that. But yeah, and then I feel like, just like I said, generally a kind of, hopefully, caution around creating that rainy day situation so that we hopefully never have to go through this again. I think that the people at Dame, that a very, very popular restaurant down here, they're opening a new place, and I saw them recently like sharing their financials, because they're opening this new place and they got it in like funded in record time. But they were like, we're putting aside $100K for reserves. Wow. And I was like, yes. Yeah. $100,000. That if God forbid, some new thing that we don't have a vaccine for comes sweeping through, $100K could go an extremely long way. Yeah, for sure. It could, and I think it also created this kind of, I think I can relate it to this. When I got laid off, I was like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. But then I went like 4 months, I was a nanny, and I figured it out, and I made it work, and it proved to myself that if the bottom falls out, I could survive. And I feel like for restaurants, there's been a very similar thing, the ones that were able to make it through, that like, I don't think everyone should have to, no one should ever have to struggle like that again. But I think it kind of has created these avenues for how do we keep on going. I think people started doing making products that they can sell, or creating markets, or just just different income flows that aren't just people coming to restaurants. And they're also raising menu prices, which is, if you know anything about how restaurants work, like I said, margins are so thin, and people are not used to paying for food what it actually costs to eat. So now I think it's been a really horrible growing pain, I think, for certain folks. And of course, if you are not made of money, it makes dining out harder. Yeah. But the truth is that whether we have inflation or not, ingredients cost more than they're being sold for. And restaurants need more of a cushion than they have before. They can't just sell things for so little just to satisfy a customer anymore. I think those have been some of the major changes, I think, just off the top of my head. Yeah.
We are, I'm actually opening up a restaurant next week. a ghost.
I heard.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And it's really interesting being on this side of the game, because seeing, first of all, coming up with, and I've helped open a couple other restaurants doing like branding for them over the past 2 years, but being on this side and seeing all that goes into it is very eye-opening. It's definitely, going to help me, give me a little bit more grace for, the next clients that I work for, to understand, how much they have going on. But I will, the food cost aspect to it, going through it and saying, I've heard for the last 2 years, restaurant owners just say how much everything has gone up in price, and, from containers to food to you name it. And seeing what our food cost is going to be for one of these chicken sandwiches, I'm thinking, this is like, if this is the price today, what on earth was it 3 years ago? Like, I mean, it's hard to comprehend. Like, okay, this is what I'm paying today. What were you paying before all of this started?
Yeah.
So it's been really interesting to see that. We had friends who during right in the middle of the first year of the pandemic, they were just talking about how slow they were, and cost. It was like really kind of the first push for everything's going to be so much more expensive now. And so I told them, I said, you should raise your prices. Like, you haven't raised your prices in 2 years before this. You should do it. Everyone else is. And so they did. And that next weekend, my wife and I went for dinner, and we sat down and we went to grab the menu, and the owner ran out to the table. He said, "Hey, I took your advice. We raised our prices. Everything's been going great now. It's wonderful." I was like, "Oh, that's awesome." And I looked at the menu and I about had a heart attack with how expensive everything was. So
yeah,
it's just really interesting to see, I have to be cautious of how I say this. I still have massive respect for anybody who will take the risk to open a restaurant. I mean, of all things. I mean, it's just, there's no cheap way into it. You can't really like MacGyver to get, even if you do, it's still expensive to open a restaurant with everything that you need. But I am surprised how many people prior to the pandemic, I would have thought, well, you must be a genius if you have this restaurant and you're you must be one of the smartest business people that exist in our area. And then to see all the guessing that goes into decisions, it's like, oh, you all really need a lot more help,
Yeah. I think because most restaurants don't have CEOs, right? Like, you are the chef, you're the CFO, you're every single position in one.
Yeah.
And a lot of, it's not like every chef has gone to business school. Mm-hmm. These are, you know what I mean? It just kind of, it's a very, very hard, and even with a great accountant, it can be hard. Like, that's why these restaurant groups, which have, which basically are run like corporations, they can they know how to handle every single dollar. But when you're a small restaurant, you have to really, it's like you're learning on the job, I feel like. Which can be very difficult, which is why it's like, it has to be a labor of love, right? Because why else would anyone do it without that love? You need that love to want to do it. And I think that's what makes restaurants so, awesome, is that everyone who's I don't think it's ever easy. Ever. Even for the most successful places, I don't think it's ever easy. And so that's why it's really a service industry. Going to eat out and being served food like that they're doing a service for you, and it's bringing pleasure to your life. And the rewards are not it's not riches and all this other thing. It's basically just hopefully having somebody say, "Wow, that was delicious." You know what I mean? And paying and tipping well.
Right.
And so it just has to be. And that's why I'm really excited for the newsletter the reason I'm here, I guess. I like this newsletter I just launched about where to eat in New York City.
Yeah.
And, I've gotten a million emails already about like, I live not in New York City. I'm like, it's okay. It goes a little beyond. It goes a little beyond. It's okay. I'm going to hopefully try and get to a lot of different places. But for now, just trying to look in my own backyard. But, like, I feel like it's coming at like just the right time. I feel like the fact that the newsletter launched the day after the first day of spring is perfect, because it's like, I feel like now 2 years into the pandemic, and now after like a year of having widespread vaccinations, and, it's still not over. Even like, they lifted the mask mandate in New York, and even I'm still a little bit, shaky about it. Like, New York City went through it. They saw the worst of it. This was the epicenter, you know what I mean? And so we'll always be a little bit shaky, but, I feel like the last 2 years, I just kind of, had let, the pleasure of going out to eat kind of fade into the background, because for the first year, there was no indoor dining. And for the second year, it's like slowly coming back, right? So, and then of course, in December here, we had a huge COVID wave, which I think almost sent people back into hiding, because we're lucky it like, rose and crashed relatively quickly, I'd say. But like in December, it seemed like, are we about to start round 2 of all the shutdowns? Restaurants were closing because they couldn't staff, because so many people had COVID. I got COVID in December, after not having had it since the very beginning of the pandemic. I'm lucky I had a very mild case of it. But like, I think now we're kind of seeing it come back to life, and I'm seeing, and even more, I'm seeing people opening restaurants. Which feels so insane, but it's awesome. And like, there's new restaurants opening, and I'm like, and it's just proof that you really can't keep the New York City dining scene down. Like, you can try, but you can't. Like, it just, like, there's a hunger for new restaurants always, and people love to open them. And so, it's awesome to get to, I was just going through my calendar of like where I've eaten this month, and I've already hit like 20 places in 1 month. And I'm like, this is great. Like, some of them are not new, some of them are new. It's a mix, but it's mostly just knowing like, okay, we're doing this again, guys. Like, reservations are so hard to get right now, because everyone just wants to go out and eat. And so I feel like it's a perfect time. Hopefully, fingers crossed, that nothing, everything has an asterisk on it now. So you never know. But hopefully this is like the right time to finally like sit down and be like, okay, guys, dining is back on in New York. Like, let's do it again. You know what I mean? And so, yeah. And I just hope that like by this time next year, we're going to be having, everyone will be able to breathe much easier, hopefully,
I feel like this summer is going to be, we have a few restaurants we work with down in like the Rockland County, Hudson Valley area, Beacon and New City and Congers and Nyack. And my brother who works with us a little bit, he lives down in Congers. And it's a completely different climate down there for a lot of indoor and outdoor dining. I want to get to the newsletter more, but I just want to ask you this one question before we do that. Have you noticed, are there a lot of the restaurants opening, or I guess I should phrase it as, do you notice a lot more or newer restaurant groups opening, like starting, or restaurant groups opening new restaurants, or does it seem like it's still like independents? Because up here in our area, it's a lot of, we never knew what a restaurant group was, and all of a sudden, like 7 of them have popped up over the past year.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a mix here. New York obviously has so many. We have like Major Food Group, we have Union Square Hospitality Group, we have, I could, like, the list goes on and on. I think it's really, it's both.
Yeah.
I think we're trending very heavily in the direction of new places opening in the city because they're anticipating return to office and trying to kind of get things ready for that, after work crowd and, coming and tourists, obviously. They're like hoping for a big tourist summer. And I have to say my inbox, the same day the newsletter launched, my inbox filled up with emails from people who do not live in the city who are like, I'm visiting. Can you help me? Unfortunately, I can't help every single. I'm not a concierge. I'm sorry to everyone who wasn't able to help. But, but there's people who they want to visit and they're like, where do I go eat? Like, I haven't been to New York in forever, or I'm coming for the first time. And so there's Manhattan West, which is right next to Hudson Yards, which and they're distinct from each other. I guess they're separated by 10th Avenue. But, that is filling up with very fancy places. Chisciamo, a new Italian place from Danny Meyer that I went to last weekend.
How was
very
it?
Good.
Yeah.
From Danny Meyer and his chef, Hillary Sterling. And then, Casadani and all these different places. And then Rockefeller Center is building out now to become like the fancy dining spots for the east side of the city. And but they're like kind of doing they're working with more chefs who are local to New York City.
Yeah.
So like Greg Backstrom and Ignacio Matos, people who've already established themselves in New York and have a couple of restaurants under their belt already. So I find that one really interesting because I think it's very, very, I think it's supposed to really appeal to New York City dining enthusiasts who know the scene pretty well. So that's pretty nice. But yeah, but I also am just seeing little projects pop up all over the place from like people who had maybe a pop up during the pandemic being like time to become a restaurant or, with the real estate, I think, these landlords are eager to fill out spaces. No one was going anywhere, right? So I don't know this for a fact. I need to talk to people about it, and I'm very interested in it. But like, I feel in my mind, like it would be easier to rent a restaurant space now because we lost, and like there were so many empty storefronts, unlike renting apartments, which is now apparently impossible according to my friends who are looking. But yeah, I think it's just blooming again between restaurant groups and independent. But at the end of the day, New York has way more independent restaurants.
Yeah.
New York City, obviously, has way more independent restaurants than it has restaurant groups.
Yeah.
Like that, the city is very individually minded. I don't know how all these people do it. It's true that like small business owners are so brave because it's really a lot of people just doing it on their own, and it's amazing.
Yeah, it's wild. So tell us a little bit more about the newsletter. It's just launched, and what can someone expect from it?
So it launched, yes, on the 22nd, and it's weekly. And basically, my background is in service journalism, which is just helping people figure things out. I've been doing that for a long time, and there's so much choice. And so my job and the purpose of the newsletter is just to create something, a digestible, weekly dispatch of the choices, and hopefully make people feel like they have like a semi-curated, like a semi-curated guide to eating in New York. But at the same time, I'm not like a pitchfork. I'm not going to be like, this place sucks and this place rocks. Like I'm not a critic. That's not really my bag. People like what they like. There's restaurants that are crazy popular where, the food is okay at best, but it doesn't matter because people who go there love it, and that's fine. People love what people love.
Right.
So I'm just trying to but for anyone who's like me, felt like they kind of just lost the thread of what it's like to eat here, whether they are from here or they're not. Like, I just want to be like, let's do this together. Let's explore our own backyard again, because we live in one of the most exciting places in the world to eat food, where you can eat cuisines from like 80 different countries if you want, and they're all and all of them are in Queens. And it's like, I think it's just an exciting time, and also just kind of getting to chronicle the reawakening of our restaurant scene. It's been slow going, but now I feel like it's kind of bursting now. We're hitting like, now we're getting, one or two places opening, maybe 3, 4, whatever, at least multiple places opening per week, which was how it was before the pandemic. During the pandemic, you were lucky if a new place was opening like every other week. So, but we're definitely hitting that cadence of like, okay, new places, new places, new places. And, New York definitely the restaurant culture here can be like burn bright and fast and then go out really quickly. But they just keep on coming. And there's always a project that's in the works and coming soon. And that's so, so exciting. And that's what I want to chronicle. But I'm also looking at, in my mind, the New York City, I won't say metropolitan area because I think it's really insulting to be like Philadelphia is the 6th borough. It is disrespectful. I love Philly too much to say that about it. But like Philly is only 2 hours away.
Yeah.
So why don't we go eat in Philadelphia? Why don't we go eat in New Haven? Why don't we go eat in Jersey City? Why don't we go eat, there's in the Hamptons on Long Island. In my mind, I'm like anywhere that's kind of within a 2-hour drive of New York City, excuse me, I'm considering it fair play.
Wow.
Because and then also at its very core, all 5 boroughs, which sounds crazy, but the mainstream food folks, media, whatever you want to call it, there's always been local blogs who do the footwork and they're amazing, like Bowery Boogie and all these different local, publications. But the major publications, for some, even Brooklyn is out of the way. So imagine how Queens, the Bronx, and Staten Island are being treated. And these are people live here. There are people who live here. They have restaurants they like too. And so I'm like, last weekend on Sunday, I got in my car and I drove to the Bronx and I ate at 2 restaurants in the Bronx because I was like, the Bronx counts, obviously. And, I'm going to put, Staten Island on my calendar soon to go eat in Staten Island because all 5 boroughs deserve attention. There's good food everywhere. And so just trying to kind of take an eye to all that, knowing still that the majority of new restaurants are still opening in, Brooklyn and Manhattan. But still, all 5 boroughs deserve a fair shake, and I'm willing and able to give it to them. I have a car, so I can do it,
It sounds really exciting. I can't wait to check it out. For those who are listening and watching, how can they find it? How can they subscribe to it?
You can find it at nytimes.com/newsletters/where to eat, I believe.
Cool.
It's also linked on like my Instagram, which is Nom Nikita, NOM. N is in Nancy, and also on my Twitter, which is Nikita RBK. It's everywhere. It's been in newsletters. I hope that's the right link. I don't have it off the top of my head.
Well, I'll make sure, and we'll find it and put it in the show notes for everything. Yeah. So, well, awesome. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking time to come on the podcast. I appreciate it. And for everybody who's listening or watching, make sure that we'll put the link in the YouTube and podcast notes. So make sure that you get out there and get the newsletter and subscribe to it. So thank you so much, Nikita. Appreciate it.
This was amazing. Thank you so much.